partner in crime, co-founder. Rich, how are you today?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks, James.
You've been working very hard on the topic of today's webinar, which is linking QuickBooks with Procurement Express.
That's right.
So the goal of this webinar should be about 20 minutes, and we're going to go through, why you might want to do this in the first place. We're going to go through exactly how it does it. You're going to give a bit of a tutorial example of setting it up. We're going to explain the benefits of it. And then at the end, we're going to share with people on how they can actually get some help on setting this up in Procurement Express themselves.
Sounds good.
Okay, so just a bit of a backstory first, Rich. I mean, what started us down this road of wanting to link Procurement Express with QuickBooks?
Well, I think a lot of customers have asked us for it. It's something that accountants and bookkeepers have felt that is necessary to be able to push purchase order data into QuickBooks if they're using some kind of separate purchase order system.
And of course, QuickBooks has a purchase order module. So why would you need Procurement Express at all if you can just use the purchase orders in QuickBooks?
Yeah, QuickBooks does have a purchase order module, and you can do a lot of things with it. The problem with it is that it doesn't really have a great approval process. So it's very difficult to set up any kind of approval routes so that it goes through management before it gets approved and those kind of things. So what has to happen in that case, if you are using QuickBooks for a purchase order system, is as the bookkeeper or the accountant, you have to create the purchase order yourself, and you have to kind of wait for emails to come to you. You have to wait for paper-based POs to come to you before you create the PO within QuickBooks. So it's a lot more cumbersome. And then the second reason is that you could allow your users to have access to QuickBooks so they can create their own POs, but most accountants that I've spoken to, they just don't want to do that because QuickBooks, they look after that every day and they don't want anybody to make any changes to it and so on. So it's best to QuickBooks is kind of left alone and is left to the accountants and the bookkeepers, but that there's a separate purchase order system that can be used to track spending and to manage approvals and do all of those kind of things as well.
And I guess a lot of people in the organization on the upside wouldn't know what an account was or what accounts were, what classes were. They wouldn't know the jargon. They wouldn't have the training to be able to work QuickBooks correctly, or even they might do more damage than good if they were let access to it.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, if something looks like an accountancy package, then it's quite fair, I think, for them to say, hey, this looks like an accountancy package. We really don't know how to use this. We need some training. And you don't want to give that to everybody. So it's best if you have another system that's kind of very straightforward and easy to use and simple to use, and then leave the accountancy application to the trained professionals.
Okay, so what we're going to show people today is how people in ops can raise those POs, have them approved correctly, and see when they've been paid, and all the time syncing up into QuickBooks.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe you can actually just show us a little bit, I mean, the nuts and bolts of how do you set the two up together?
Yeah, okay. So imagine you have a trial of Procurement Express set up already. In most cases, when people are going to be wanting to connect QuickBooks, they probably have some kind of trial of Procurement Express already there. So we've got Procurement Express open. I've got a trial version of that. And then we've also got our QuickBooks. So I've got our QuickBooks open. So we make sure that both are open in two separate tabs within our browser. That's the first thing. And then we go into the apps section in QuickBooks in the bottom left-hand corner here, and you can search for a wide variety of apps. In this case, we're going to search for us, of course, Procurement Express. So you should see that there, procurementexpress.com. And when you click on it, there's a button, Get App Now. You click on Get App Now, and that will it will pop up with a box to ask you if you want to connect, and you'll say yes, and then that will automatically connect you to procurement, your QuickBooks to Procurement Express. It's important to say that if you ever want to disconnect it, you can do that. You can click on My Apps here on the right-hand side, and you can always disconnect it. If you go into Action, you can say Disconnect, and that will disconnect Procurement Express straight away. So that's how that's done.
Great. Okay. So I can see now what has actually happened there. Has Procurement Express now got access to your QuickBooks data?
It does. So what you can do then is that we sync a number of different items with QuickBooks, vendors or suppliers being one of those, tax rates being another, and some others which we'll go into in a minute. And so the best thing to do once you've connected Procurement Express is to go into the integration sections of Procurement Express. You go into integrations and you'll see the QuickBooks connection. So click on settings there and then choose to import data. When you do that, let's do it now. When you do that, what will happen is it will go off to Procurement Express and it will do to QuickBooks, and it will do an import of all of your vendors, and it will do an import of all of your vendors and your tax rates and a number of other things, and it will drag them over from QuickBooks into Procurement Express for you.
Okay, so if I have vendors, or in the UK version, they're called suppliers, if they're in QuickBooks, they're pulled into Procurement Express.
That's right. Once QuickBooks and Procurement Express are connected, any change to a vendor within Procurement Express will change within QuickBooks, and any change to that vendor within QuickBooks will change in Procurement Express automatically.
Okay, and just it's a little bit confusing here. So in Procurement Express, we call vendors suppliers, and it may be called vendors or suppliers in QuickBooks, depending on which version you have.
That's right, yeah. It just depends on the version, yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned tax rates there. So can you add, all your tax rates should first be created in QuickBooks so they appear in Procurement Express? Yeah,
for most items, you'll continue to edit them in QuickBooks, but when you do, then they'll automatically be moved over or synced with Procurement Express as well.
Okay, and then the key part of QuickBooks is the accounts. How are accounts mapped from Procurement Express, from QuickBooks to Procurement Express? Okay,
let's start off by showing you a purchase order, I think, within QuickBooks, just to give you an idea of how that works. So let's click on a purchase order. This is a purchase order within QuickBooks, and there's a number of items associated with this purchase order. So first of all, you've got your supplier name and supplier addresses and the purchase order date and the purchase order number. This is a purchase order number that's been brought over from Procurement Express. QuickBooks is good enough to allow us to use custom-based purchase order numbers, and so that means that our purchase order, the Procurement Express purchase order numbers, are we can push them over to QuickBooks as well, so they remain the same, which is useful. But the items that we're going to sync are the category or account. So QuickBooks calls an account or a general ledger, it calls it either a category or an account, and it uses those two names in the same sentence, basically. So here they call it a category, but it's basically an expense account. So if we click on that, we can see all of the expense accounts associated with this particular QuickBooks. So that's your chart of accounts, your expense accounts. We want to bring those over. We want to bring over your tax rate. So we click on the tax rates here. There's a lot of tax rates here. This one says no VAT. We want to bring those over and sync those. Customer, that's a field you can use. Some customers of ours use it and some don't. So you may or may not see that in your heading. If you don't use it, then you wouldn't see it. But that's quite often used by services businesses if they want to attribute a particular spend to a particular customer. So they can go back and say, how much have we spent for that particular customer? And then class, that's like a tracking class, which a lot of people use. A lot of people might tie that into their departments, or they might tie it into specific projects that they're working on. Lots of different ways to use that, but basically to give you a way to drill down into that data, that spend data a little bit further. And so we'll sync the class over as well. Sorry, I missed that. What did you say?
Sorry, Rich. So that's for your cost accounting. If you want to split it out by country or by HR, non-HR, other expenses, you can look at it later. Exactly.
Now, for these ones, customer class, you'll see that you can, if I go to the top, you can add a new one in as you're doing it within QuickBooks. If you do that, then it will automatically sync that class that you've added over to Procurement Express. And the same for customer. You can add a new customer in there. It will automatically sync it. So if you're making any changes to those items in QuickBooks, it will sync those for you into Procurement Express.
Okay, so that's how you would have raised a purchase order in QuickBooks.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing once you connect it to, you'll start to use Procurement Express to raise these POs. How does that look?
Absolutely. So the idea is that all of the start of the process, the start of the purchasing process, getting approval will all be done within Procurement Express. And at the point that it gets approved, then we push it over to QuickBooks so that the other parts, like turning that purchase order into a bill and assigning an invoice to it and so on, all gets done through QuickBooks, which is what most people are doing already anyway in the normal way. So let's go into Procurement Express. And let's go in to create a new purchase order and show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is a standard Procurement Express purchase order request form, with the exception that there's a couple of extra fields. We normally call those custom fields, and you can add more if you like. But these specific ones are the ones that we're going to sync over with QuickBooks. And so when you do the QuickBooks import, it will create these fields for you. So the important ones to know, there's basically 5 fields that is pulling in data from QuickBooks directly. The supplier or the vendor, so all of the vendors are going to be synced. The tax rates, all of the tax rates are going to be synced. The class field, which I showed you on the PO, all of those classes are going to be synced. The customer, and then the account. Account is the same as category. Like I said, QuickBooks uses them in the same sentence, essentially. It's the same thing. So in this respect, we bring in all of the accounts that are marked as type expense. We are not able to bring in any of the accounts that are marked in any other way. Only the expense accounts are part of the PO module within QuickBooks. So they're the ones that we're able to bring in. So all of the expense accounts show up here. Okay, so how you would create a purchase request. So your regular user is going to come in here. They're going to add a vendor. Choose Aer Lingus in this case. I have the SKU field on, so we can put in a stock control unit. We can do a description, so we'll say that's for a flight. We can select a Procurement Express budget. So anybody that's used Procurement Express will know that you're assigning every line item to a budget, and that's controlling kind of your spend against those particular budgets that you've selected or that you've created. So we'll assign office expenses to that, and we'll put in a value, maybe 2,500 with no tax. And then we're going to go in and we're going to choose a class. In this case, I'll choose that engineer class, and I'll choose a customer, say Google AdWords, and then I'll choose an account. So I can go in and I can choose travel, or I can choose sundry expenses if I want to, whatever that might be. So let's choose motor running expenses. And then I can put in a note. That's going to get transferred over to QuickBooks. And then I'm going to click send, and it's going to go to through my approval route. So approvals and all of those things, I guess, will be done in a different video or on a different call. But basically, in this case, it's going to self-approve because I'm the only user in this particular account. And because I have $1 million worth of approval limit, it just approves. So once it gets approved, it's automatically going to push that purchase order over to QuickBooks.
Okay, so the key point here is, I guess, the difference. So everything we've seen there, you can do actually in QuickBooks. But if you want an approval step, there's no way of doing it in QuickBooks, but that's what Procurement Express brings. Is that right?
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're empowering your regular users to be able to create these requests for spend, to put this data into a system, and for that data just to transfer seamlessly over to QuickBooks for you, so you don't have to sit there entering it. Right.
So the relevant managers on the ops side are approving these POs rather than emails going backwards and forwards to the finance department asking to raise a PO,
exactly,
checking if it's okay, etc. Yeah,
exactly. So there's one thing about getting users to select which QuickBooks account they want to use, and sometimes we've spoken to customers that don't want their users to have to select which QuickBooks account because they don't understand, what computer running costs might be, or whether cost of sales, whether the thing that they're buying is actually for cost of sales or whether it's actually depreciation or something else. And so to avoid that, what we've done is we've allowed also for people to select, or for finance people to select QuickBooks categories associated with our Procurement Express budgets. So regular users can choose a budget. They can say, okay, office expenses, but then rather than have them have to choose the QuickBooks account as well, we can assign a QuickBooks account to that budget office expenses so that they no longer have to do that. And that means that they don't have to choose that, and they don't have to be given that responsibility.
Okay, so if I work in sales, for example, I don't have to know anything about the accounts, I just pick sales and the right budget, and the system will map it correctly to the correct line item on the P&L or on the balance sheet. Yeah.
Exactly. So in that case, we have a setting to change the budget so that they're linked to QuickBooks. And then when we do that, we can go into the budgets and we can select a particular budget. Let's just choose office expenses here. We can go in and edit that budget, and we can see that there's now a new field under that budget called QuickBooks account. And in that case, we can choose what account that office expenses budget is associated with. So in this case, I've already assigned it to office expenses, repairs, and so on. But when I go in now to procurement to create a new purchase order, when I select office expenses, the account gets selected automatically for me, and I can't change that as a regular user because I'd have to go back into the budgets and change it that way. So it's permanently fixed. Office expenses is permanently fixed to the office expenses category within QuickBooks.
Okay, so let's move over now to the AP side, I guess. So that purchase order, once approved, so only once it's approved, it gets pushed over into QuickBooks. Yeah. And then in QuickBooks, then I'll see them pop in there.
Yeah, let's show you that. So if I go in and I just refresh this page, this is my expense transactions listing, and I refresh that page, we should see that purchase order. There it is, that Aer Lingus one that I created for 2,500. We see that there. There it is with no VAT. We see the correct customer that I chose, the correct class, and where it's going to. And then you remember I put it in as motor running expenses, and there it is.
Great. So an invoice comes in, gets submitted. What happens then?
So in QuickBooks, the normal way of doing things is that when an invoice comes in, you put the invoice as a bill against QuickBooks. You type the invoice in the normal way, and when you do that, when you create a bill and there's a purchase order that exists associated with the same vendor and for similar amounts, then QuickBooks will say, "Hey, there's already a purchase order associated with this. Do you want to tie the two together?" And you can say yes. Right? You can copy and you can also go into the PO and say copy to bill, and that will automatically create the bill from the information you've got already. So at that stage, then you're going to pay the invoice in the normal way. So you could pay the invoice. Some customers pay the invoice by bill.com, especially those in America. They would pay by bill.com, and that would automatically pay their vendors. At that stage, then the bill gets marked off as paid, and when the bill gets marked off as paid, then the purchase order gets marked as closed. So at the point that the bill is paid, that there's nothing left to pay against this purchase order, then it gets marked as closed automatically. And when it gets marked as closed, which we can do on a manual basis there, when it gets marked as closed, then that will automatically get marked as paid within Procurement Express.
So the people in sales department, to continue our example, don't have to ring in and ask when something's being paid or not. They can just go into Procurement Express and see straight there, okay, this purchase order has been paid. Absolutely.
But even better is that without that link between whether it's marked as paid or not, the accountant or the bookkeeper would have to go into Procurement Express and mark that purchase order as paid manually. But you don't have to do that now because you've got a link with QuickBooks. And as soon as you've done it within QuickBooks, it marks as paid within Procurement Express. Now, the main reason for marking as paid within Procurement Express, apart from closing off the purchase order and kind of keeping it nice and neat, is that, as you said, the regular user can see that it's paid. So if they're the ones that have the relationship with the vendor, with the supplier, then when that supplier calls them asking for money, they can actually answer that question by going to the purchase order system and not having to work that query up the chain to anybody that's working in finance. So that means that finance users, we've found in the past, get less queries to deal with, and so they can do other things that are probably better for the business than just answering queries all the time. The other reason for marking as paid is in your budget section. So in your budget section in Procurement Express, every amount of money that you've assigned to a budget gets given a state, and that state is requested, approved, or paid, depending on the state of the PO that money is within. So requested, it hasn't been approved yet. Approved is it's been approved, and paid is you've paid it. So the approved column is important because that's showing you how much you've committed to spend against those budgets. And paid is important because it's drawing money out of the approved column because you've already paid it. And so that shows up then automatically. And so your approved column, your spend commitment, is going to be updated in an automated fashion. And it means that you can always go and look in real time what your spend commitment is.
Okay, this looks good, Rich. So how can people get in touch with us to get some help in setting this up? I guess they could do it themselves, but they may want to talk through it first.
Yep, absolutely. You can do it yourself just by going and clicking on the app like I showed you earlier. But you can always come and speak to me or book a call with me or one of my colleagues in support to help you get this set up. There's really not that much that you have to do. Most of it is automated, but feel free. There's my email address on the page there. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and we will put a link to a booking link in that you can book a 15-minute call with us as well, just to go through things if you need to.
Okay, thanks very much, Rich. See you next time.
All right, thanks a lot. Take care.